Today on Murphy's Law Garage, the Mustang joins the camber gang. Yeah, stick around. Dang it. All right, so my wife, a sweetheart, among other presents she got me for Christmas, also bought me some STEEDA drag springs. They're great for applying more traction and increasing the speed of transfer to the rear of the car. I also know from having worked on Seth's S650, the suspension is very similar on this, that rear coil is a pain in the butt to get out of these cars. But I'm gonna try to sneak it out of there by disconnecting the sway bar and the shock and having Jake bounce on it a bit and see if I can pop it out of there real quick. I don't know, we'll find out if that's even possible on the S650, because I know you could sneak it out that way sometimes on the S550. If not, I guess I'm loosening the subframe mounts. I have the McPherson strut coil type compressor and not the one that's made for subframed IRS rear pickup trucks that reaches in and grabs the coil kind of like this. So it's not like I can put a spring compressor on it. Anyways, let me show you the springs that I've got and then the camber bolts, and then we're gonna pop this out real quick. All right, so here is the STEEDA springs. Somewhere on here, oh, you see? To my baby, your awesome wife. Isn't she amazing? She bought me the STEEDA progressive drag springs. These are very specifically designed for drag racing applications. They will not make the car handle better, only go in a straight line more faster. And then
more faster is more better.
Yeah.
Can't forget.
Mustang. And then the front, you need camber bolts. I have these right here. The only other thing I need to grab before we start taking the suspension apart is I have an angle finder, and we're gonna try to pull some of the camber out of the rear and the front while we've got it apart to make it easier for the guys on the alignment rack, because these things tend to be troublesome with the weight on the lower control arms to get the camber just right. So I'm going to help them out and try to get a little closer to zero in the rear, because we're going to have it aligned to zero at the end of this video. So let's get started with all that. All right, so what I've done here to get an idea of where exactly we currently are, because obviously I'm up on jack stands, I've made sure the car is really settled and not going to move around on me. I've got an angle finder on it that's on the caliper, sitting straight. It really doesn't matter where I put this as long as it's on the same rotor face. So, you know, it's going to be parallel to this rotor face, and that the two align with each other. I could put a lug nut on the face of the rotor here and move this over. See if it'll slide over for me, but they should be right about the same. I was reading 89 on the caliper, and we're reading 89 here on the face of the rotor. So I'm at 89 degrees on this side, and the passenger side was 90. And all I'm going to do is, whenever I'm putting it back together again, I'm going to loosen the camber bolts after the springs are in, and then take away a degree. I'm going to go positive. I'm going to take away a degree of the negative camber, and then lock it back down again, just so that it's closer. So on this one, I'm going to go from 89, which is tipped in at 89, and bring it up to 90. And the same thing on the opposite side. I'm going to go from 90 to 91 just to take a degree away, if that makes sense. No surprise at all here. I've got the upper strut as well as the sway bar disconnected. It falls down a good bit, like, I don't know, an inch or so, but it's very steady in here. So I'm going to have to take the IRS cradle bolts out and let the IRS sag a bit and support it with the jack so that we can pull this spring out. I'll show you what that looks like once I lay down under the car. All right, so IRS cradle bolt here, this big sucker out of right here, and then IRS cradle bolt here along with that bracket, and the two smaller bolts that has to come out of here. Two smaller bolts are there. You can see I've got the IRS cradle supported here with a wood block and a jack, and that lets the IRS frame sag. And you can see now I wiggle this and the spring is ready to come out. So I'm going to get back up again, push down, and then pull that spring out. All right, so this is definitely one of those things in the world if you have the right tools. Pry bar from Harbor Freight, nice long 3-footer. You stab it into that hole down there, right under that link, and it gives you a really good spot to push down on the control arm. So that spring is right on the edge, so I'm gonna go ahead and slip that out of there. All right, so Jake stood on the pry bar for me. The easiest thing to do is to get one of these to slip out. For me, it was the lower isolator. I got that to slip out pretty quick while he was putting some weight on it. And then you can kind of get the bottom of the spring to turn out and then either yank really hard to get it to go past the sway bar end link, because that's what's going to catch you, or you get it pinned in the corner and slip this out from the top. Either way. So let me get these isolators back on the new spring and we'll get it stuck in. All right, so factory spring out, and you see how thin this is in comparison to that heavy chunker in there. That sucker's a lot shorter too. We've got it in here. I had Jake jack up the engine crate, the subframe cradle a little bit so that we could tighten down on all of this so it's not trying to fall out of here, because it is pretty loose. Make sure that whenever you put your rubbers back on, there's a flat spot that touches the end of each of these coils. This area, each of the rubbers has a reference mark that it aligns on, and most especially the bottom here, there's actually an indent in the cup of the lower control arm that rubber is supposed to slot into, along with the end of the coil, to make sure that it's in just the right place. If you don't do that right, the coil will be too tall on one side and you'll have some noise from it moving around. So once you pick the IRS subframe up and it's not even all the way in, you'll tell if it's wrong, because right now it's just barely touching and it's settled really well. It's not wiggling around or moving or making any noise. You want to wiggle it and check. Anyways, putting this back together again is in complete reverse. I'm going to put the IRS subframe bolts back in. You must do this by hand, and be very careful when putting these large bolts back into the IRS subframe, because it is very easy to cross thread them. And if you fuck this up, it is really, really, really hard to fix. So make sure it goes in by hand. It shouldn't be under any stress. You should be able to run them in and then tighten them up to spec. So that's those two back in, and then I'm gonna put my strut and my sway bar back on and then do the other side. I'll show you when I'm done with the other side, and we'll set the butt of the car down and then go tackle the front struts. All right, so over here on the other side, got the new STEEDA drag spring in. The camber adjustment on these Mustangs, it's been a minute, is in this slotted bolt up here at the top of this control arm. So loosen this, and what I've done is I've just loosened it enough that it slid all the way back towards me. It's all the camber adjustment could have, and then tightened it back up again. Let me make sure you can see that. This bolt right here, see the U-shaped upper control, that bolt right here, loosen that on each side, and then if you pull it all the way towards you, that's positive camber. And then I tightened it back down again, and that's why it's so difficult for the alignment shop to get to it, is because it's tucked up in here. And look, this nice sharp hose clamp to cut you up while you're working in there. It's very difficult for them to get in here, and I'm imagining more difficult for them to get the wheel to shift around. So this is what they asked me to pull all the way out while I was in here and the suspension was unloaded. So I've got that done. Let's move to the front. The reason why we're going to zero with this setup, of course, is drag racing. Camber, whenever the car squats, it induces even more camber because it's IRS. So if you start out at -1, you could go as high as -2 while the car is leaving, and it gives you less contact patch because the wheel, rather than being flat, is tipping in like this, and we don't want that. So we're gonna run it to nearest zero, staying a bit on the negative side. So you never really get cars perfectly even. You can try, but they'll never be perfect. So a little like close to -.1 or -.2 will be fine, but for the most part, zero, so that it's as close as possible. Some people go a little bit positive so that when the car squats, it goes flat. If this was purely a drag car that was trailered, I would do that, but I'm going to be daily driving this thing all over, and the car will drive wonky like that. So especially when taking turns, so we want to lean on the negative side just a little bit. All right, so I've moved on to the front of the car. Let's go through the things that need to come off here. First, sway bar end link comes off of the strut right here. ABWS cable has one clip, two clips that need to be pulled out. The brake caliper, even on a base model, that's a heavy son of a gun. It's got to come off. It needs to be supported by something. I got it on a bucket over here. But two bolts out the back, pull those out, sit the caliper down on something, and then you can then finally get a impact gun or a wrench on this and back the two nuts off right here. Do not back them all the way off. Let me grab one of these nuts. Put this on real quick. What you're going to want to do, because these are swedged in there, kind of like a stud, is you're going to take this nut, put it back on, and get it just shy of being even, and then take you a nice heavy ball peen like that, and then give it a couple of good whacks right here on its end, and it'll pop out of there. And you can see there's very minimal damage to the end of that bolt, and the nut still moves great. So once you've got that done, the lower part of the strut is now free of the spindle. All we're left with is the upper. Now, because I'm just doing the springs here, what I'm actually going to do is back this nut off, and when I do, the strut's going to pop out the bottom. And that means there's no need for using a spring compressor with this via removing the upper strut hat. So let me go ahead and get this backed off, and I'll show you swapping a spring out. All right, so once you pull that nut out, this whole assembly with the spring is going to pop down, and just don't have your fingers in the way of that because it's pretty violent. But anyways, you're able to kind of finagle this and push it backwards again, keep your fingers out of the way, and it pops through the bottom of the lower control arm, and it frees up spring and the strut itself. And then you're going to take the 3 bolts out the top hat right here, and now you've got them laying in front of you. So last thing we need to do is take a spring compressor, compress this spring a bit. I guess it depends on how much your lower is. For this drag kit, it's not much, so I have to use a spring compressor again. But compress the spring on, top hat on, tighten it up, and then put it back together. All right, so it'll take a spring compressor to tighten to compress the spring again to put this whole assembly back together. You have to compress this a surprisingly large amount with the traditional McPherson strut style compressor. So don't be afraid to really crank that sucker down. You need a lot of room. There's the old spring. New one, though it is shorter, they really do have a tremendous amount of preload on the front strut on this car. Anyways, it's all put back together again, and I'm gonna slip it back in the hole. I'll probably be done for today and have to start again tomorrow morning once I get this side put back together. All right, so it's getting dark on me, but there it is. ABS lines reconnected, camber bolt is in and adjusted out. All of this is back on, sway bar and link, brake caliper. So it's getting dark, mosquitoes are coming out. This will have to wait till tomorrow for me to do the other side. And then after that, you'll see me bringing it to the dealership for an alignment. Good morning, Murphy's Law Garage viewers. Gosh, I wish I'd have started earlier yesterday on this, because this morning it's really cold. And by cold, I mean like 55 degrees. Don't laugh at me, Northerners. This is cold for South Louisiana. I need to finish this corner and the Mustang will be done. And then right after this, Seth's truck's pulling in for some suspension work. So, and the reason why I started late yesterday is we were working on Jake's car. So all the cars this weekend, but let's get this done. Ta-da! All right, well, it's on the ground. It looks a little lower, but it's always hard to tell because the suspension's not settled yet. Seth and I are going to go for a lap. Ooh-wee. All right, it's a little lower. It passes the 2-finger test, a little tighter than 2-finger in the front, a little more than 2-finger in the back. The car's not on concrete, so it's a little uneven, but looks great. It feels great. It needs an alignment. I can hear it scrubbing in the back a little bit because I messed with the toe adjustment, but that's obvious. So we're going to bring this thing to the alignment shop, get it lined up, get the rear camber zeroed out, get the meats on the back. But where I'm going to start working on getting some suspension on this thing, the next time you'll see this car, it'll have alignment and rubber. All right, it's all lined up. You can see how square, how fat those tires are. We're got all the camber taken out of it. I'm over here at the local Lincoln dealership where they got me hooked up and fixed up. That's it. Next thing to do is we need to go to the track and see how the car does on the track. I might very well get you a draggy running here. I don't know. We'll see how it goes before I edit the video. But regardless, thank y'all very much for watching and coming along. And as usual, we love you. God bless. Peace.